Okay, I think we can get started. A very warm welcome to all of you and a very good evening as well. Thank you so much to all of you for joining our session today. I know we were supposed to conduct this last week, but due to some unforeseen circumstance that did come in, we had to push it to this week. But thank you so much for all of your cooperation and agreeing to push it to this week. And happy to see you all here. Today our session on strengthening data in M&E. So this is a part of our larger series that we're currently running on M&E. So it's called the Beginner's Guide to Monitoring and Evaluation. We're planning to run it for the entire quarter. Our previous session was on designing effective systems, wherein we covered, how to build a theory of change, LFA, and all of those. For all of you who missed attending that session, happy to share the session recording as well as the resources that we had circulated post that session. But I think before I hand it over to our speaker today, I'll also briefly introduce her. So Richa, if you could also just move next. Okay, so we actually have two speakers for today. Yep, will do. So we have Richa. So Richa is the Senior Engagement Manager as a part of our Impact Measurement and Advisory team at Sattva. She has around 11 years of experience in assessments as well as MEL, and has been instrumental in setting up MEL systems for various programs and organizations. And she's led multiple evaluation studies in the international development sector. She's worked across several sectors such as livelihoods, education, climate change, financial services, etc. She has also undergone a course on impact evaluation for evidence-based decision-making from University of East Anglia, UK. Prior to this, Richa worked in Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, India, focusing on monitoring and evaluation portfolio. So thank you so much, Richa, for facilitating our session today. We also have Veda Kulkarni. She is the lead India Data Insights. She'll just be joining in the next couple of minutes, but happy to introduce her as well. Veda has over 2 decades of experience leading software product companies in various roles, including product management, project management, and leading and building software for business process automation. As the lead for India Data Insights at Sattva, so she's responsible for providing data-driven strategic insights using a modern stack of data platforms and building a library of data assets. Before joining Sattva, Veda was also an independent consultant with Invendus Technologies, and she was also senior manager at Onmobile Global. So I think Veda would be coming a little later, but just wanted to introduce her as well. And yep, Rich, I think I will just unmute you. Sorry about that. I think you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Um, I- what we'll do in these 2 hours is basically give you an introduction of how to use data in your organization and to have a very evidence-built decision-making narrative. We will take up all the questions at the end. So the session is planned for 2 hours. Me and Veda will speak for roughly 70-80 minutes, and then we'll have ample time for discussion. So you can either drop your questions on the chat, or you can unmute yourself in the Q&A round, and we'll take up those questions. Yeah, so let's get started. So today's agenda basically will revolve around 3 pointers. The first is we'll try and define what are the different roles and responsibilities in an organization with respect to M&E, and how can that help in the effective data flow. The second discussion point will be to understand data and how can we sort of analyze it to capture it through the M&E tools, and how can that help us in making decisions and course correct if there is a room for that. The last section would be to just talk about the change management process that's involved in building an M&E culture in the organization. So it's not as easy as it seems like. So we'll spend a little bit of time into that discourse as well. Moving on to the first agenda, where we'll talk about we'll do a refresher on M&E, and then we'll move on to the R&R. So monitoring is basically a continuous process by which stakeholders obtain regular feedback on progress based on the milestones and targets that you set out for yourself. The important point to note is that monitoring is usually done for your processes, activities, inputs, and outputs. Um, Evaluation is usually very periodic in nature. It's done at regular intervals, but the frequency of evaluation is lesser than the monitoring. And evaluation focuses on the achievements that you have achieved for your outcomes, goals, and impact. Right. So going back to the theory of change, we usually have four stages, starting from outputs, outcomes, and impact, right? So monitoring focuses mostly on outputs and possibly some of the outcomes. Evaluation will definitely cover all your outcomes and your impact. A combination of this is what we refer to as a monitoring and an evaluation strategy or a framework, which is basically a management function. It's supposed to be continuous, and the progress is tracked by understanding what have we achieved, how we have achieved, when we have achieved, and also looking at both the intended and unintended effects. Right? It can be either positive or negative. So that's what we refer to as a monitoring and evaluation, right? Now, this slide is largely to emphasize on the importance of benchmarks and baseline. Um, if you don't know where you started from, it's very difficult to showcase progress to anybody in terms of where you've arrived, right, or where you've come. So the best practice or the ideal practice is to always set your benchmarks and baselines to basically capture where are you in terms of your status and where do you intend to reach, and then track it on a regular interval. That's largely your M&E. In this process, you should always also assess your assumptions. A lot of times, we are, of course, working in the field, everybody's doing their work, it's all well intentioned, and we usually think that whatever we are doing is contributing to the project outcomes, right? So the snippet basically shows that is your project in a good shape? We are like, possibly, apparently, but we started 5 years ago, nobody stopped us. Possibly it's going in a right direction, right? Just because nobody has asked us doesn't mean that we are in the right track. So it's always important to avoid your assumptions, check your assumptions. These assumptions can be both external and internal in nature. So when you're conducting an evaluation, you'll of course assess your outcomes and outputs and impacts, but in tandem with that, make sure to also check your assumptions. um, I guess we are all here because we understand the importance of M&E, but I'm going to quickly brief about this slide. Monitoring and evaluation is a very integrated functionality of any organization. It's not supposed to be in a silo. So if you see in the snippet that's on the right hand side, we have said that M&E is again one other pillar in your entire program management exercise. When designing is efficient, when M&E happens, when you're learning and you're course correcting, you're meeting at regular intervals to reflect on the project. You're also taking your community feedback, you're doing your thematic research, you're making sure your budgets are allocated properly. That's when the project is a success, right? So that's what we're trying to say, that M&E needs to be mainstreamed, it needs to be integral in any program or in any organization rather, right? Moving to the left hand side in terms of just why do we want to do M&E, um, uh, no surprises there. One is to keep track of the progress, any problems that we are witnessing, or maybe the field team is witnessing but it is not coming into the picture. Are there any extra budgetary requests that are coming in? All of that is basically comes under the tracking mechanism, right? Then we also need to provide regular information. All of us create these quarterly reports, annual reports, etc. So it's important to also provide the managers and stakeholders right kind of information and also at the right time. A rigorous M&E also helps you identify the problem at the right stage. A lot of times, these problems or the reasons as to why, let's say, a program didn't work or partially worked, is it of course comes into picture, possibly into evaluation, but then that's a very wrong time to identify this, because you can't go and course correct. You've lost a lot of meaningful time, and therefore M&E is extremely important when you want to keep a good track of your risk. Again, it helps you analyze why you have not achieved your targets, or even if you have achieved your targets, could you have achieved more than what you had envisaged, right? So the whole efficiency angle comes into play. A lot of times we want to establish causality in the program, right? This happened because of our work, or this did not happen because of our work. So cause and effect is something that also come into play when we conduct evaluations. And it's also important for auditing. It's sort of a requirement into a lot of programs. So these are larger the reasons of why M&E is so important. Now we'll move to the key area that we wanted to discuss. When it comes to M&E, usually these are the categories or buckets into which we can have our functionalities, right? Starting with M&E strategy and planning. Then you'll also need to manage your data. We collect a lot of data points. There's so much data available. Somebody will need to manage that data, so that is covered in the data management. Concurrent monitoring, which basically means that regularly the monitoring is happening at regular intervals. Reporting, so you have the data, you're doing your monitoring, you will of course report it. So reporting is another functionality. Auditing, which could be your financial audits, but also a lot of times you have these milestone based audits, so that will cover up here. Then you have a very important crucial factor, which is learning and course correction. So that also comes under the M&E umbrella. We also talk about capacity building. This largely focuses on, are we speaking the same kind of vocabulary in the organization? A lot of times the vocabulary is not the same, and therefore the interpretation goes wrong, right? So are we using the same kind of frameworks? And just coming together and building capacity as an organization is extremely important. So that is also a very key function of the M&E. Then it's about evaluation. Every program should be evaluated at some point or the other, to either establish our success, or even if it's a donor requirement, at some stage you will be conducting an evaluation. So that's again important to identify what are you going to evaluate, right? What are your objectives? What is your vision? What do you want to evaluate really? And then the last one is about dissemination and publication. We've done a program implementation, but we also want to disseminate and share our story, our narrative with various stakeholders, and possibly also try and do a publication. This is again like a knowledge sharing exercise. That's a very best practice for any program management, right? This is again not an exhaustive list. It can go on and on, but generally it can be categorized into these 9 areas. Now, we'll spend a little bit of more time to understand an M&E organogram, right? So all of us have our organization's organogram. Depending on how big we are as an organization, our M&E team will also be proportionately of that size. So if we are a foundation, we'll possibly have a lot of functionalities, and resource people tagged to those functionalities, which means you have a big team. However, in smaller organizations, you might have 2 to 3 people who are responsible for all of these functionalities in totality, right? So this organogram is just a representation to say you can have so many functions. And again, it can be mapped to the previous slide where we have listed the functionalities. But this is not a template, right? We can pick and choose as to how many people we want, who should do what, also what is the priority for us at this particular time, right? You might not end up doing everything in the first year. You can take a very slow path, but the idea is to have everything tapped into in the coming years. So usually you have a M&E head. M&E head speaks to the other head of the organization, right? For example, a M&E head will also work with the communication head when possibly we have to disseminate and publish some of our reports, right? The M&E head will also speak to the finance head, because some budget will be earmarked for the M&E, right? And then we have to go back to the finance head to tell maybe this is sufficient, maybe this is insufficient. So there is a very detailed conversation that happens with the finance head. The M&E head will also talk to the strategy head, because the program strategy will then define what kind of M&E you want to do with them, right? So as you can see, an M&E head will talk to possibly all the department heads in the organization. Now, the M&E head will possibly have these kind of functionalities. Again, we've only kept two for now, but you can replicate based on the previous slide to possibly have all nine heads here. um, if you look at the left hand side, you have an external monitoring agency, right? Now this is not a compulsion. A lot of organizations do M&E internally, which is absolutely okay. But a lot of organizations also outsource the monitoring functionality to an agency, which is why we have a head of external monitoring agency. And then it becomes the role of the internal M&E people or team to interact with the monitoring agency to tell them what they're supposed to do, right? So that's the kind of interface there. On the right hand side, you can see there is an external evaluation agency. Usually, monitoring agency should be separate from an evaluation agency to just reduce bias. However, we've seen in multiple situations where there is one agency who's doing both monitoring and evaluation for an organization, right? So the external evaluation agency basically will come and evaluate your programs at regular intervals. Again, it becomes a responsibility of the M&E head to understand and describe what kind of evaluation should happen, what do we want to assess, etc., right? So then these are the two extremes. In between, you will have your operations manager, you will have your impact reporting manager, you will have analytics manager, you will have a L&D manager, etc., etc., right? So that gap can be filled by as many managers as possible based on the unique functionalities we've discussed. Now, once these functional heads are defined, you will then have coordinators, and then for each head you will have an evaluation coordinator, you can have a reporting coordinator, a capacity building coordinator, etc., etc. This usually comprises of an M&E team. Now, M&E team will have a very strong interface with the program team. So even though in this diagram we have put the M&E at the top and program at the bottom, this is not to say that it is a top down approach. This is just to say, because this is an M&E organogram, we have put M&E at the top, and then we are saying what kind of an interface will that M&E will have with the program, right? So all M&E coordinators will then speak to the various spokes, right? Now in this particular case, we are suggesting that if you have a big organization spread across India, you can have a north coordinator, you can have a south coordinator, etc., etc., right? And then that person will speak to the program spock. Then even for them, you will have field coordinators, you will have data collectors, etc., etc. So this can be as extensive as you would like to make for your organization, but we're trying to give you a snippet here. So as of now, we have discussed why we needed M&E. We have also discussed what could be the possible roles and responsibilities of an M&E, and how can we possibly describe job descriptions for people who are involved in the monitoring and evaluation space, right? Now, we wanted to also introduce this matrix called RACI matrix. This is largely to record the roles and responsibilities, right? A lot of times multiple people are doing multiple kind of functions. However, at the end of the day, the buck has to stop somewhere, right? Somebody needs to be held responsible, somebody needs to be accountable for that particular delivery. So which is why we're saying that maybe it's a good idea to have a RACI matrix as a program management tool. Now, RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Responsible basically is a person or a team who will execute all actions around that activity, and they will make sure that it is done and it is completed. Accountable is the person who will have a oversight, will oversee all decisions. They will also either approve or reject your initiatives specified, right? So accountability is absolutely important, because they are not the people who are executing, but they're eventually accountable for that task to happen. In this entire process, you will also do multiple consultations with multiple people, right? So that's what consulted means. For anything to deliver, whom are you consulting? And these consultations will then have multiple suggestions, alternatives, feedback, right? So the person who's responsible will take care of all of these consultations and integrate it in their delivery. Informed is basically an individual or an agent who will receive regular updates about what is happening, right? They're possibly very high stakeholders, cannot be involved in day-to-day functions, but they would like to be informed. So at any point in time, if there is an escalation, they know what is happening and why is it happening, right? So that's basically a RACI matrix. We've tried here to bring up an example to explain how can you sort of practically use this, right? Again, we have done the allocation here um, generally, but this is not something that has been benchmarked. Based on your organization, the kind of roles you define, you can always change this, alter this, etc. Now let's take a couple of activities to go through it. For example, if you have to define your report objectives, right? You have to define, why am I making this report, what is going to be the objective of this report. For this, we are saying an M&E manager is responsible. It's her or his job to define the report objective. They'll definitely need to keep the data collectors and data analysts informed, and program managers will be, of course, consulted in the process, but they'll also be accountable that the report objective is defined, right? Let's take another example where you have to collect relevant data. In this situation, um, the data collector is the responsible person. Program manager is, of course, accountable for the entire process, while data analyst and M&E manager can be kept informed at this stage. Now, when it comes to analyzing information, the role changes. Data analyst becomes responsible, while M&E manager still remains informed and program manager still remains accountable, right? So you can go through these various activities to understand how can you sort of reshuffle the roles based on what activity you're delivering. So that was the first section where we understood the roles and responsibilities. We understood the organogram. We understood why we want to do M&E, and we understood the RACI matrix, right? Now we have data, right? We have done the entire process. We have collected the information. Now, how do you want to analyze this information through various M&E tools available? And that should ideally help you to do decision making and course correction, right? So that's what we are doing right now in this phase. Now, just to give you a glimpse of what kind of data you might capture, again, can be bucketed into two categories. It could be either a quantitative data or a qualitative data. Quantitative data is usually collected from surveys, experiments. You might have existing databases. It could be a census information, administrative data, etc., etc. Qualitative data is basically, the examples are interviews, which basically means your key informant interviews, your PIIs, focus group discussions, observations that you do, any kind of literature review that you're doing, or any kind of visual data. These are the two buckets. Now, you might want to analyze this data with very very different perspectives, right? Which is what we are calling different types of research design. Again, we are, for the simplicity of the session, we have categorized it into four, but there are various variations within this. So whenever you're doing any kind of a research design, you will have to go into depth to understand what kind of research design do I want to deploy for the study. The first could be ideally an inferential design, where you have a population, you have collected data from a sample, and what you're basically trying to do is generalize your findings that you have arrived from your sample to the entire population, right? That's inferential design. You're trying to draw an inference out of your analysis. Descriptive designs are usually when you're describing a characteristic or a phenomenon. For example, X percentage of men, percentage of females, X percentage of children going to school. These are usually descriptive examples. Predictive design is when you're making future outcome predictions. Let us say an experiment has happened right now. If you repeat that experiment in the future, will you get similar kind of results, right? So you're trying to predict the design, and that's predictive design. And the last is diagnostic design, when you're trying to identify underlying factors or problems, right? You go to the field with a very diagnostic approach to say, I want to understand this community or the problem that they're facing. Diagnostic design is usually done at the beginning of the program, when you're trying to plan the program, right? When you're trying to come up with your theory of change, is when you can deploy your diagnostic design. So that's largely to showcase what kind of data we have and what kind of research designs we can do. Now, coming to monitoring, monitoring again can be categorized into two categories. It could be internal monitoring and external monitoring. There are pros and cons into both of these sections, and we'll go through it together for you to be able to understand one, should I go with an internal or an external monitoring, and second, what would be the best for me in terms of my budget, right? So, as the definition is, usually internal monitoring is done by the organization, by the M&E team, to basically assess at regular intervals that my processes running up to the mark, is my program okay, checking on the program's health, and making sure that you're going back to the program team with with recommendations and suggestions. External monitoring, however, is done by an external agency, largely to assess the performance, but also into certain situations, it's more of a compliance mechanism where the funder would want an external monitoring agency to do so. It's as I said, it's conducted by internal staff, the internal monitoring, while external monitoring is conducted by either an external agency or it could be an external consultant, etc. Usually, the purpose of internal monitoring is to adhere to the organizational standards, while the purpose of external monitoring is to make sure that the whole process is transparent, it's accountable, and also bringing a very independent perspective into the whole situation. A lot of times, when the internal M&E teams are working with their program teams, they tend to become more closely attached to the work, and therefore they might not be able to bring a very fresh perspective to the table. um, the frequency of internal monitoring is usually ongoing, which means you're regularly collecting data, while external monitoring is periodic in nature. You might want to do it once in 6 months. The benefits of internal monitoring is that you do the process, you immediately have the data, you can go back and course correct. So there is no time lag when it comes to internal monitoring, which is why it is very, very effective also. However, the benefit of an external monitoring is that it's very, very objective in nature and brings you a very independent perspective into the table. The limitation is that for internal monitoring, it has potential of bias or conflicts of interest because you're all working in the same organization. So there is definitely a gray area where you're a little bit conscious about what you want to raise, how you want to raise, etc. While in external monitoring, the limitation could be that you don't always get access to the internal data and processes, right? And also, one of the limitation of external monitoring is the cost. It is very, very expensive as compared to the internal monitoring. Okay, so now that we have spoken about data, we have also spoken about the pros and cons of both internal and external monitoring. We are going to look at this tool. This is again one of the tools that organizations can use to track what they have achieved, right? But there are multiple other tools available, and again, you can pick and choose based on what works for your organization. Now, for example, in this tool, we have impact, which basically means we are going to write an impact statement. You're going to have indicators. Indicators are usually representative of the statement, which is very smart in nature. Smart meaning it will be specific, it will be measurable, it will be realistic, it will be time bound, etc., etc. So it has to be smart. Again, it can have both qualitative and quantitative indicators. It's not necessary that you only want to track quantitative indicators. So the suggestion is that have a 80-20 ratio, where you have 80% of your quantitative indicators, but you also make sure you have some representation from the qualitative aspect. Then you have something called baseline, milestone 1, milestone 2, right? So baseline is where is your starting point. Let's say I'm starting today and my target is that I'm going to do 10 capacity building sessions. So your baseline becomes 0. At this point in time, I have not collected or I've not done any training. But my milestone 1 possibly will become 5 sessions, and milestone 2 might become another 5 more sessions, right? Now that is your planned trajectory. So you will write 0, 5, 5, but in your achieved row you will also mention, as in when you progress in the program, what have you achieved, right? Have you actually exactly achieved what you intended to achieve, or have you overachieved it, or have you underachieved it, right? So it's important to sort of analyze that kind of information. This template also talks about the source, right, which basically means where are you going to fetch this information. Is it going to be from quarterly reports? Is it going to be from some census data? Is it going to come from primary beneficiaries? So you basically need to highlight what source of information you're going to look at. This is again very important, because a lot of times we have the data, but there might not be a document to validate it, which in a way fails the entire exercise. And therefore having a source or a means of verification is again very, very important. And in the end you have assumptions. So for example, for that particular impact indicator, you might assume that beneficiaries will be participatory, or teachers will show up in your training sessions. That's your assumption. uh, Possibly it will happen, possibly it will not happen, right? So we are just saying that outline or explicitly define your assumptions, and then at regular intervals also check if this is happening or not, right? So this is basically a logical framework, and these are the various components of logical framework. Let's look at it with data, right? So as you can see, we are going to focus largely on the planned and actual boxes. As you can see on the right hand side, we have put a box for qualitative insights, where you can actually write your qualitative insights if you're not able to come up with a qualitative indicator in itself. So this, in this manner, you can capture the story also, you don't miss it out in any manner. Now let's look at this log frame, which has data, right? Now we want to understand, how do we make use of data? How can I make decisions based on it? Because the eventual objective for all of us to be able to use data. um, so we're going to look at two situations: one where you meet your target, and the other situation where you do not meet your target, right? It's underachieved. Okay, so let's look at this example. Here basically the output is, which is this, is program team conducts the training sessions for teachers to help them tailor teaching methods to students level. So basically the output is, it's a program team is conducting the training session. Their indicator is how many training sessions you've conducted, right? And what was the attendance in these training sessions. We are going to talk about the attendance in the training session. Now let's say your target was that you had thought, or you had planned that 90%, there will be 90% attendance in my sessions. However, after you've done your sessions, on an average you found that only 70% was my attendance, right? Now what do you do about it? One clear result is that you've not achieved your target. Second, you want to look at the reasons as to why you have not achieved it, and what can you do to make this number better in the next cycle, right? So ideally we would want to look at the, now this is one of the way in which you can look at the data. Depending on what indicator and what context you are in, you can of course change the strategy here. In this situation, you'll possibly look at your internal MIS data to first understand if this is actually a difference, or is it a data entry error. A lot of times when we are crunching this data, there is a data entry issue. So first, please check that. Second, we'll then possibly try and reach out to teachers to understand why there is a low attendance, right? Why are you not attending the session? Or possibly teachers are attending the session, but possibly leaving early or coming late, etc., etc., right? Now, one of the possible reasons we found here was that the timing of the session was a little odd, and because the training venue was very far from where the teachers were traveling, they would find it very, very inconvenient, and they would either not come, or they would come but leave early, kind of a situation, right? So the mitigation here is that possibly re-strategize, work on your timings, work on what days will work for the teachers, talk to the headmasters to understand what will work for them, and then go back and do this again, collect data, and try and understand then if we are able to now achieve the number that we wanted to achieve, right? So this is one of the methods that you can use. Similarly, if let's say, for example, you train the teachers, now the outcome is that teachers will go and possibly use these teaching strategies in the classroom, right? So the indicator here is that you're conducting interactive learning activities. Great. You wanted to do 10 activities in the classroom. Yes, you have done 10. Is that sufficient? um, Possibly not. This is again a very quantitative indicator. You also want to understand the quality of delivery of these sessions in the classroom, right? So possibly at some point in time you might want to do a focus group discussion with students to understand if they are benefiting from these sessions. One, second, are they what do they have to say about how the teacher is delivering the session, etc., and possibly use that feedback to go back to the teachers, right? So you can also try and explore all of these methods to analyze the information. One more example that I'm going to talk about is where, let's say, your impact was that the learning outcomes of students will increase, right? So student learning outcomes percentage was 35 was our target, while we achieved 32, right? Now what can we do about it? We basically need to go back to the questionnaire to understand, is there a specific learning outcome where students are lacking, right? Now in this particular example, possibly students were not able to do division in mathematics, right? Now that's a very particular area of the math learning outcome, which is why the entire training now, or possibly not the entire training, but a section of the training has to very intensely focus on the division part of the maths, right? So that's the kind of feedback again that you can take and try and improve the SLOs in the upcoming cycles. um, I'll just pause here to pass it on to Veda.
Thanks, Richa. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Okay, so today we will look at continuing with where Richa left. Richa talked about quantitative data and qualitative data. This part of the section, I'll be looking at how we can analyze quantitative data and what are some of the how Satwa has built data for good platform which provides ready to use insights and analysis which can be easily consumed by any user. So let's look at that in a while. So primary objective of the session is how can it help me, how data can help me, right? We all know this data is the new oil, and many people talk about the importance of data and how it is benefited. But when we really want to understand what is in it for me, or how I as an individual can benefit out of this data, so here is a small, can you go to the next slide, Richa? Yeah. So if you look at on a very, very high level, if you see on the left side, there is data points, which all of us understand. We have so many data points, which either we collect or we see around us. And not necessarily all of them make sense to us. When we just look at it, it's just ocean of numbers is what we see, right? So identifying those key key data points from this ocean of numbers is what is going to be our first step, which is to identify the information. So among all these thousands of data sets or data points we have looked at, our first step would be to cut the clutter, look at what is it that is relevant to us, relevant to the exercise we are doing. So that becomes your information. Now, the next step is, okay, now we have all this information. How do I kind of connect the dots to get some knowledge out of it? Otherwise, they're just individual data points, which doesn't, it's good to have that, but to make sense out of it, to derive some knowledge out of it, I need to connect the data points. And that is your third thing. Now, okay, I've connected the data points. I have gained some knowledge. Now, what is that insight I'm getting out of this? Right? So, for example, let's say I have data points with respect to education indicators, where I talk about, okay, I have school indicators talking about there are these many number of schools, these many government schools or rural schools, and these many teachers are there in the schools. And then we have the pupil teacher ratio. Then I have the school infrastructure, which talks about number of schools with toilets, with computers to internet. Now, if they're all just information, they're all various data points. Now, if I want to derive some insight out of it, I need to kind of look at, okay, if I have these many schools and these many teachers, is there a way to say, how do I connect to it? Can I get, and how many teachers do I have per school on an average? Or how many teachers do I have with computer knowledge per school? That's the insight I am getting. So only when we connect these dots is when the insights are arrived. And that is the key information to make any kind of decisions. And using these insights, if I'm able to actually take multiple of these insights and make some decisions, that's where wisdom comes into picture. So the whole data life cycle or the data journey from your thousands of data points to coming to insight and then to a wisdom of how they can be connected and what information I can use to make what change is how we can leverage data. So, Richa, can you just go to the next? So this is very, very high, which everyone can understand, the clutter of Legos, a heap of Legos. We don't know what to do. If we just put them in order by color and then arrange them in a certain way, and then put some visualizations, build some blocks out of it, and then explain that with a story, this is how it can be made easy to take any kind of decisions, to make meaningful, get meaningful insights out of the data we have collected. Now, this nothing to do with, I mean, this, it can be used in your day-to-day life. It could be used in M&E. It could be used in any kind of data analysis, financial, admin, or any of your programmatic data, anywhere. This rule applies. So not necessarily with respect to the monitoring and evaluation. Can we go to the next one, Richa? So if you look at this, if you see all the data, typically we see like this in Excel's numbers. Nobody understands these many numbers. If I have to make any kind of decision out of this, it's very, very difficult. The same thing if I give in terms of a visualization, which is on top, a map. With just looking at the map, I know that the eastern part of India, which is on the darker shade of blue, we know that the groundwater recharge is higher. Nobody needs to tell any text. Just by looking at that map, I get that sense that, okay, the ones districts which are with the darker shade have better recharge than the ones which are having the lighter shade. Now, the same thing, if I want a little more information to be given to users or some to help someone understand the story better, if I actually put them with certain insights and with certain knowledge, saying that 2/3 of India's annual groundwater recharge is dependent on rainfall. This is a very powerful statement. I am making a statement where 66% 60% of India's annual groundwater recharge is rainfall. So we are highly dependent on a rainfall. So these kind of points actually help users, instead of just using the raw data, like Richa mentioned about when we create a template of capturing all our information in baseline, midline, and this one. Eventually, when we analyze it and put it in terms of a story or in terms of analysis, it becomes much more powerful to make certain decisions. So can you go next, Richa? So to actually help with all this, the India Data Insight, a platform from Satwa, was designed to make it easy for users to consume secondary data. So this platform, India Data Insight, primarily provides insights pertaining to the data which is published by the government agencies. So you see that a lot of ministries are publishing a lot of data nowadays as part of their annual reports, or a lot of them have their own websites, dashboards. What we do is we actually go through all the ministries, collect all the data, clean it, structure it, and bring out. So what you saw in those earlier slides, the data points, we actually process it and bring it to a state where it can be easily consumed by the users, either in terms of visualizations or in terms of a data story, which is a report which actually gives users a curated story about what the data says and what kind of insights are arrived out of it, and the various options for the user to play with the data and derive their own insights, not necessarily what we have curated. So that this platform actually gives you that ease of using secondary data in the processed manner. So so what does this do? It's a data guide for all of your India socioeconomic indicators. We provide reports. We provide interactive dashboards. There are a lot of data narratives which can be downloaded, and all our assets are spread across multiple SDGs. We will quickly look at this platform, how you can use it, and this platform is an open platform. When I say open platform, anybody can register on this platform, and it's a free. You can use it on registration. So let me just share my screen. Ashwini, I'm not able to share my screen.
1 second, I will just check the settings.
Okay, I think.
Yeah, should be possible now, Vida.
Okay, so looks like some limitation with mine. Let me just, sorry about this. Just give me a minute. I need to sorry, I think there is some issue with my thing. Ashwini or Richa, would you be able to get the IDI app up, the platform up? I can just take your help to.
Yeah. Ashwini, are you taking it up?
Sure, I'm just pulling it up.
Yeah, or let me know, I can do that.
Just a second. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know. It's Richa, maybe it would be great if you could.
Yeah, 1 second. Let me know if you guys can see it.
Yeah, just go to indiadatainsights.com, Richa. Yeah. So this is the platform. So users can, if you go on top, Richa, on the top right, the profile. So users can actually register and log into IDI for free. So that's a simple registration. On registration, users will get a mail to activate their account, and you should be able to access post your activation. You should be able to access all the assets on IDI. We have all the content here, primarily with respect to the SDGs, and you can access in the terms of interactive dashboards or toolkits or IDI real charts. So let's look at one specific use case. If you could just quickly click on SDG 8, Richa.
Yeah.
So if you click on any SDG, you will see a list of all the interactive dashboards, the toolkits, and the real charts. So we have 3 to 4 flavors of assets here. Interactive chart is basically where you can interact with the data and get your own insights with whatever is available on the interactive dashboard. A toolkit allows you to actually give you a detailed report on a particular thematic area. So you will see that under toolkits. And a real chart basically gives you a deck in a PPT format. And these are high resolution insights, most commonly used insights, which can be downloadable and embedded into any of your reports or any further analysis. So that is IDI real charts. And blogs or short narratives, short stories, which we talk about taking some important or key thematic areas, and we actually write a story about how what are the key insights emerging out of that. All of the things, assets you see on IDI are highly data driven. So all our stories are keeping with respect to data in mind. There's less of literature and more of insights and visualizations, which will be there in each of our asset. So to access any of this, while you can browse without logging in, to access any of the assets on IDI, you will need to log in. So Richa, if you could just log in, sign in as Satwa user for now. So once you log in, just click as a Satwa user. So Satwa users have a separate login. Of course, all of external users can log in with their registered name and email ID and password. Once you're logged in, if you could just go to SDG 8 again, we will be able to actually access each of these assets and get deeper into that. So let's look at the workforce and employment in India. Click on the workforce employment in India, the last part. Yeah. So this is an interactive dashboard. If you see on top under the content, we actually give a brief about what this interactive dashboard covers. So this basically interactive dashboard covers the periodic labor force data, and we have this data from 2017 to 22. We keep this updated as and when periodic labor force data is released. So all our interactive dashboards start with showing the picture of India, where India stands, and then we zoom into state. And if there is a district level information, we get into that. So where does this information help anybody? So if you look at, okay, if you look at this first thing, India, we see the worker population ratio for India. If you look at for urban, the worker population ratio is 46.6. That is 46% of urban working population is employed. Among the male, it is high, but if we see that the female worker population is much lesser, is almost one-third of less than one-third of what is there for male, which is true for urban. But if you see the rural population, rural worker population is much higher than the urban population. Now, if you want to further zoom into this of how does it look for a state level, if you could scroll up, Richa. So if you go to the state details on the third tab,
this one,
you can also select here, and you could also look at by education level, by state details, by this one. So if let's say I want to look at which of these states, or how does it look for India at a overall population, what is the worker population ratio for different education levels? So if we see that across India, be it rural, urban, or total, somebody who is a diploma certificate course, who has done a diploma certificate course, the worker population ratio is higher, much higher than what you would see for a graduate or a postgraduate. So so this kind of gives us what is it that how is the worker population looking at for India, and if you want to make any programmatic implementation on, okay, do we need to focus on a particular state or a particular education level, this kind of helps. Now this right now is showing at an India level, but we could also, if let's say we are looking at a particular state, we can select from the drop down the state we are looking at, and we could also choose for a year. So here, if you see, it gives me a pictorial view of which are the states which are performing lesser than the others. So if you see the Bihar, the worker population ratio is just about 40% overall. But if the same thing, if we switch to female, if you could just change it to female instead of persons, Richa. We see that the worker population ratio further falls down, and it is just 10%. So this kind of gives us an idea about which are the states which need larger intervention and larger focus compared to the other states. So this is just one example of how this can be used. And if you further scroll down, if you see there is a drop down, Richa, on the bottom right, just a drop down, download button. Yeah, just click on that. And you can actually download this as an image or a PDF or a PowerPoint. Just download it as an image. And you can embed this in any of your presentations or anywhere you would like. So this actually helps users, instead of recreating these images, these insights, you should be able to actually ready to use it wherever you want. So this is one simple example of how we can use this platform to get insights on the socioeconomic indicators for India. This platform is free, so you can register and explore this platform. And if you have any doubts, I'm happy to answer them through this.
Sure. Any questions on the IDI? I think, Veda, do you want to take it up now or possibly later?
Yeah, either ways, if there are any questions, I can take it now.
I think there's a question on the chat asking, do you publish an API?
Not yet, Gayatri. Sorry, Gautam. We haven't yet opened up that, but that is something we have as a pipeline. We don't expose our data sets through APIs, the raw data itself. What we are providing is reports and insights and interactive dashboard for people to play with. The reports, of course, can be downloaded both in the PDF and PPT format.
There's a question on the sources of data also.
Yeah. Yes, Gayatri. All the sources are predominantly government data and other authorized agencies like World Bank, WHO, but anything at a district level, state level is all coming from the various ministries, all central government, state government data. It's not live. One of the things, Abdul, with government data, if you have seen, a lot of it is scattered in PDFs or in some images. They don't, not all of it is machine readable. So what we do is that whole process of collating, cleaning, bringing it in a machine readable format so that we can derive these insights and bring them on the platform. So we do this on a periodic basis. As soon as the data sets are released by the ministries, we try to, within a month or two, we will process it and get it on our platform. Right now, you might realize that there are tons of data sets out there. It's an ongoing process. We are expanding our data sets to various sectors and a lot of ministries. Some of it we have been publishing for last 5 years now, 4-5 years, and like your PLFS data, your public health infrastructure data, your NFHS, we have all the data. Education, UDI's data is updated every year. Higher education data, then there is on environment. So we have a bunch of data sets which is updated annually as and when the ministries release it. So what is the lowest? Yeah, and at periodic manner, so the what is the frequency? Yes, so if you could actually log into IDI and you'll see what is the granularity of data. We clearly mention this data is up to, every asset will have this granularity and what is the level of data we have. And also if you scroll down, you will actually see the source of data from where we have got, from which ministry we have got the data. So every asset has all this information so that users know from where we have got this data. What is the lowest level of data available on the website in terms of geography? We have up to district level and some of it up to block level, but most of it is up to district level. Do we have data on agriculture and performance of government schemes from the sector? FPOs, not yet, but something in the pipeline. But we do have a lot of agriculture related data, be it in terms of production, yield, land usage, irrigation, groundwater, a couple of very interesting reports on the state of agriculture in India. Millets, we have data on millets. So there are a lot of assets on agriculture. You will see them under SDG 2. So all of that, even if you just type search for agriculture, you will get a bunch of assets on agriculture. Can you also share some insights on the different available tools for analyzing the primary data? I think Richa would be covering that in her following session, Shailendra, the third part of the section. Yes, you can write to us, but depending on, Prasad, are you saying that you have the data and you want to share that with us for further analysis or request for a data? If you could unmute and so are you saying if you are looking for a data, would you be able to request that on the platform? Yes, you can ask for a data set and we will put that in this one in our roadmap, and as soon as possible, we will be able to process it. Awesome. Any other questions?
So maybe Veda, we could have Richa take up the third part, and in case there are any other IDI related questions, we could have that taken up at the end.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Ashwini. Thank you. Over to you, Richa.
Thank you. All right, so we are moving ahead with the last part of our presentation. Here, we just wanted to briefly talk about why is it important to build an M&E culture in the organization, right? So here is why you need to tell your story. Um, we are doing so much work on ground, we are talking to so many stakeholders, we are possibly also doing advisory work, advocacy work, etc., etc. So there is a lot of information that we have, but it's also important to process that information, articulate that information, and package it for different kind of stakeholders, right? So primarily we would want to build empathy through our work. We have compelling stories. From our stories, we want to have an emotional connect with any kind of stakeholder that we are targeting, and therefore one of the use case is to narrate a very humane story about your program or about your organization. It also creates a lot of relevance for you in the sector. By making your vision and mission and the cause, you're basically also making it relatable to the audience, right? You're also trying to have a very strong footprint in the sector, and therefore because there are a lot of organizations right now, but what is it that and how is it that we are trying to bring in that additionality? That storytelling is also very, very important, right? Also, we want to inspire action. We want more people to show up, to join the organizations, to join the sector. So it also inspires action from that aspect. Also, there might be cheerleaders for your organization, but we also want to retain them and engage them. And therefore, regularly updating your progress or telling them what you're doing keeps that engagement ongoing. And therefore, it's important to also package it in a manner that somebody would want to read that story, right? So engaging and retaining your supporters is also something that's crucial in this aspect. It also sort of amplifies your impact, because we are, let's say, our organization, but so much work is happening on collaboration. We collaborate with like-minded organizations who bring different things to the table, and therefore you're spending less energy into reinventing the wheel, but making use of those collaborations so that eventually you're able to amplify your impact or outcome, right? And therefore when you are out there in the market, people know that there is an organization who works on certain aspects, and therefore it'll potentially help you secure more funding, more resources, and the eventual objective for us to create larger impact will also be achieved, right? And then also and the last point here that I want to talk about is about trust and credibility. When you talk about impact stories with real people, real evidence, it does build in that trust and capability, which again comes back to the credibility of the organization and the work we are trying to do for the audience, right? So I'm sure we all agree that we need to tell this story. I also wanted to make a use case to say, don't think of M&E as an additional functionality for you or for the organization. Look at it from a very investment point of view. Um, I absolutely agree that in the beginning, when you start having resources on M&E, it might look like a very expensive affair, but it's possibly like it's looking like a liability for now, but it will be an asset in the future. Is what the larger takeaway from this slide is, because if we don't invest in M&E, there are multiple organizations surrounding us that have already established evidence-based data collection and decision making, and they have already started to share, right? So every stakeholder out there will ask us to prove that we have done this, right? And therefore data becomes so much more important. It becomes such a central piece of discussion across the sector. So think of it like an investment, and therefore whenever you're sort of allocating budgets, etc., think of the longer term returns than the shorter term burden that you might feel at this point in time. So M&E will definitely help you in data driven insights, right? You will be able to identify trends, patterns, correlations between different projects. You might understand something from one project, and when you want to do a phase 2 of that project, you already know well about what will work and what will not work. So your next phase will be, of course, built on the first phase and not again start from scratch. The idea is that you use that data for whatever pattern, trend, and correlation identification. Also for decision making, as we were looking at the log frames, the idea is to make informed choice and not about what is our opinion or what is our perspective around things. So based on the accuracy of the data, we would ideally want to have very informed decision making. um, it will also help you identify success factors. There are a lot of stories that get lost because we have not documented it. And therefore, if this is sort of a factor, let's say if you're designing a report template, if you know that this is going to be used in my communication, you will definitely want to document it with all the consent and ethical protocols in place. And therefore this will also help you in like communicating your story to the wider audience, right? Again, the data will help you innovate and improve, right? A lot of times, and as we were looking in the log frame, um, we understood for some indicators it has been achieved, right? But you might also want to think the quality part of it, and therefore the improvement will depend on it. So it will definitely push you to think out of the box, improve, but that will only happen if you're able to crunch the data that you have gotten. Again, it will help you in efficiency and effectiveness. When we talk about efficiency, what we're trying to say is that, let's say you spent 100 rupees in your program right now for, let's say, 10 beneficiaries, and let's say by the log frame analysis you realize that with those 100 rupees I've actually, my target has been overachieved and I've actually reached out to 20 beneficiaries. That basically means that you have not really done your financial forecasting accurately, and therefore next time the per unit cost you already know has gone down, right? So it has made you so much more efficient, and with that extra budget that you have, you can possibly invest into some other program delivery theme. So it makes you efficient in the entire process in terms of resource allocation and strategizing things, right? And eventually the idea is to solve the problem, but this whole process will make you so much more proactive because the accessibility has increased so much, right? Now you don't have to wait for things to happen. If you have created that M&E cycle, it will come to you at regular intervals, and you will become very, very proactive in sort of leveraging that data to have solutions towards it. So the larger takeaway from the slide again is to reiterate that think of it as an investment for your program and also for your organization. I would want to highlight that M&E is not specific to a project. So think of it as an organization. So have some common processes, protocols at an organizational level, and then you can customize it based on the project per se. Again, this is just to capture everything at one place. M&E as a foundation for success, and this will eventually help you establish your position as a sector leader when you're able to articulate the right kind of stories, right? And in this process, you are harnessing data, you're crafting compelling stories, and you're bringing stakeholders together, and you're building that trust in that process. I'm going to end this presentation with 2 more slides where we're going to talk about some of the key pointers to keep in mind whenever you are sort of venturing into M&E. If we look at the right hand side, what we're trying to say is don't build an M&E system to collect so much information only when you need like specific data points. So usually we end up collecting a lot, but we don't move ahead of that stage because collecting data in itself becomes a burden. So the idea is to collect so much, and collect data that's super important to us, super prioritized for us, and then see how can we sort of scale it up, right? So some of the pointers that we can keep in mind is that avoid the perception that M&E is a standalone reporting task. It is not. It is a very integrated functionality. Um, Always strengthen project capacity for planning and M&E, and build a learning culture in the project. There are projects sometimes that are experimental, and that's where the M&E becomes extremely important because you want to have a very closer eye into that whole process. Try and triangulate and have mixed and participatory method approach. Usually if we have one tool that might not give you all the information, right? You will get only one piece of that jigsaw puzzle. So try and use as many methods as possible to sort of validate that information. Again, depending on how much can we spend in terms of resources, but the idea is to rely on more than one source of information. Again, build networks and share learning between projects and programs. A lot of times same organization is doing multiple programs, but there is no collaboration happening, or we are not able to share just because we have created these invisible barriers with respect to M&E. The idea is to sort of not have those kind of walls. Also, one key takeaway would be that start planning for your M&E immediately after you have done your program designing. The M&E can also be used before designing the program when you want to do a diagnostic study and things like this. But if you have designed your program, definitely start thinking about what kind of M&E framework do I want to have in this program, right? And then the most important thing I think is about making sure that the stakeholder interests are catered to, they are given as much attention as possible, and their expectations are integrated in the process. A lot of times community is such an important stakeholder, but in this whole process, once we collect the information, we rarely go back and share and tell them what's going to happen next. So that part of incorporating stakeholder interest is also very important. I'm going to also talk a little bit about the common pitfalls that happen in M&E. For example, they're usually poor system designs in collecting information, and we collect more data than what's actually needed. We have inadequate staffing for M&E, both in terms of quantity and quality. So less people, but more things to do doesn't work in a system. The system has to be well oiled in terms of both resources and budget. um, Sometimes, or rather a lot of times, we have delayed baseline studies, or we don't have a baseline study. Going back to the previous initial slide where we spoke about how it is so important and why it is so important to have a benchmark. This is why, because if you don't have anything to compare with, then it largely becomes retrospective, where the data loses its gravity, right? A lot of times we have data but we haven't processed, or we process data in, let's say, 3 months of time. That data will become stale by then. It will have possibly no meaning attached to it. So then this whole process will become futile, right? So exactly, going back to the original point of don't collect a lot of information, collect the information that is very, very key to the program. Delays in presentation, um, and a lot of times this becomes like a compliance exercise. It doesn't get used by the project staff. So that's again one of the major pitfalls we have seen in a lot of organizations. So let's try and avoid that as well. Referring to the last snippet here, which says, as left hand side says, look, 9 people successfully trained in a disaster response. great, right? Possibly not, because your target was possibly to have 19 people trained, but you only trained 9, right? So you've only achieved 50% of what you wanted to achieve. So again, going back to the importance of having a benchmark. Here are common resources that we are sharing with you. These are handbooks that are very, very detailed, created by funders such as DFID, USAID, DIME, 3IE, Better Evaluation, etc., etc. They have done a lot of pioneering work. So these are good resources if you want to venture into reading more about M&E. I'll pause here. This is the email ID that you can write to us if you would want to collaborate in any manner. We would love to hear from you, and we can now open the floor for question answers. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Richa, for a wonderful presentation. But yeah, like you said, we're opening the floor for questions now. So please feel free to either unmute, or you could also drop a question on the chat, and Richa could pick it up from there. But yeah, floor's open. Okay, we have Rati. Yeah, please feel free to unmute.
Hi. Hello, Richa. Myself, Ratikant. I work with Vasan on agriculture related projects. I wanted to ask one thing is that what kind of resources it would take for an organization to build an M&D system for its overall projects, because there are multiple projects, multiple outcomes, multiple objectives which are impacted into it. So, in order to have a correlation amongst the projects, you need to have some senior person who understands M&E very in detail, and who can anchor multiple programs at once. So what would be the resources that an organizations will be requiring, especially human resource, apart from other? Could you please throw some light?
Yeah, I'll go back to the slide to show you the organogram once and possibly start from there. So as you can see, these are the different functionalities we spoke about, right? And this is the organogram where we said that you might possibly need one person who could do all of these things, or you might need 2 to 3 people. And if you're a bigger organization, that you might have one person handling only one functionality. Similarly, it will really depend on what depth of geography you're dealing with, or what breadth of geography you're dealing with. Usually, at a program level, we allocate roughly 5% minimum to an M&E budget. It can go up to 10% depending on what's the scope of M&E. At the central level, it will largely depend on how big is the organization and what kind of work we are dealing with. Does that answer your question?
Actually, it's still thought generic. What I wanted to, so I'll one specific thing I would like to know: if a senior person who can manage the overall M&E for a system, what education background or what kind of skill set a person would need to require to manage multiple data systems across programs in an organization?
Okay. So usually the academic profile of an M&E professional can vary. It could be somebody who has studied statistics. It could be an economist as well. It could be somebody who has done masters of social work but has specialized in, let's say, quantitative techniques. So it could vary, but usually a good combination is with somebody who has studied the social subject, but also a good integration of data, which is, let's say, an economist or a statistician, or even an MBA in rural management kind of a profile.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Richa.
We also have Shailendra, who's raised his hand.
Yeah. So I'm Shailendra from Medha Learning Foundation. So I have 2 questions. One I've already shared on chat. It was regarding this. Can you share some insights about the uh, data analyzing tools. But before that, I want to know about this logical framework. Is there some different templates, or there is a one standard format for this logical framework? Because I have seen different log frame with other organizations.
Right. You're absolutely right, Shalendra. There are multiple formats available depending on which organization's format you're referring to, right? So any multilateral, bilateral agency, even for that matter, nowadays impact investment firms, they have created their templates. But I think for us, the larger takeaway should be that there are a lot of commonalities in these frameworks. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. The basic components always remain the same. It's only that 10 to 15% of component that will differ as you move from template to template. So for example, the template that I shared is the deferred template, but there are other templates also available. However, it's very, very sort of nuanced and a little bit of difference, not a lot.
Okay, so if I am starting this, like I just have to build a data log frame, then which format should I use?
You can use anything that you're comfortable with, and even in
Okay,
the format that I have shared, you can think of
that can be good. Yeah,
having some components of it, right? You don't have to have all of the components to start with, because it might become like a lot of data aggregation at some point. So you can use this template also.
sure, sure. Thanks.
Okay. I think you had one question about the tools that we can
Yes,
use for
data analyzing. Yeah, for data analysis,
data
primary data. Yeah, primary data what we are collecting from our stakeholder or from our participants. How
right.
can we analyze these data? Yeah.
So again, it will depend on what kind of analysis you want to do, right? If you want to do a descriptive basic analysis, you can do that in your Microsoft Excel. If you want to do very basic statistical test, even that is possible in Microsoft Excel. If you want to do a little bit of an advanced statistical test, you can use R, you can use Stata, you can use SPSS. R, I know, is open source, so it is not like you don't have to pay, it is readily available. Stata is a paid software. SPSS is there. If you want to visualize your data, then Tableau is available, Power BI is available. So there are multiple of these tools available. Okay, thanks, Shalendra. Are there any questions from, I think before Veda came in, there was a question that came in, right?
Yeah, I could pull that up for you, Richa. But there's one by Pankaj that's just come in from
Right.
us to verify. I'll just pull up the previous question.
Okay. Yeah. So what's your take on M&E or SROI and CSR spending, especially when we see most of the CSR is getting spent in top developed or industrialized states? Is Satwa doing advocacy to CSR funders to move to more needy districts or states, right? Um, so yes, we are doing a lot of work. So for example, one of our initiative is the Bharat initiative, where the work is happening in aspirational districts, and Satwa is very actively working towards that. We can always share a link with you, but Satwa is definitely working towards reaching the most unreached sort of geography, right? So there is this collaborative also that we are working on, which is focused only on the northeast states of the country. So yes, we are in our work, we are working towards regions or spendings which are not getting enough funding, but there is no active advocacy. The advocacy is through forming collaboratives and working with multiple stakeholders to work in these regions.
I hope that answered your question, Pankaj. In case you have anything more, please feel free to unmute.
Thank you. Because I'm working with couple of aspirational districts, especially in Bihar and West Bengal.
Right.
So we struggle. Most of these CSR partners, they prefer states like Maharashtra and Gujarat. So we
Right.
have abundance of funding in Gujarat, but when it comes about asking funders to move to aspirational district, they are still reluctant. I'll give you an example. We have a district in Maharashtra like Palghar. Every CSR spending is from Mumbai, Navi Mumbai, or Pune goes to Palghar. So in one single block, you'll find 160 odd NGOs functioning. But when it comes about Bihar, West Bengal, or Northeast, we do not find, even 160 NGOs functioning at a state level. So I think Satwa has great role to play in these aspects as well.
Absolutely. I think one of the agenda for us, or one of the strategy that we have come up with this year especially, is to work a lot on collaborations, right? We have understood that us as a consulting firm have a very limited role, but if you work with like-minded organizations who can collaborate together, then you can sort of join the hands and contribute more. So this year Satwa has very consciously started to work on collaborations, and therefore you will see that these unreached geographies, unreached regions are getting responded through these collaborators. I would encourage you to go through our website also. There are a couple of initiatives that we've listed there as well on this.
Sure. Thank you.
And you can always write to us. I can share more details on this. Would love to work on this together.
Thanks. Thanks.
Richa, one question that had come in much before.
Yeah.
It's by Akhlaq. So Akhlaq, in case you're here as well, you could maybe elaborate on that. But his question was, is need assessment a predictive design?
Yeah, so need assessments are usually part of your diagnostic studies. So it wouldn't fall in the predictive design, but I can elaborate if you have more, questions to ask on that.
Akhlaq, in case you're here and you'd like to maybe elaborate on that. Okay, maybe we could move to the next one.
Okay.
Yeah, there's one coming by Saurabh as well.
What and how would you suggest to small grassroots organizations regarding M&E processes during their initial phases? Further, how to transform the M&E practices during the growth and scale-up phases, right? I think it's a question that a lot of us get posed to. Usually we start by saying that establish a theory of change for your organization, right? A theory of change is basically, you can look at it like a strategy document, which basically outlines the causal pathways through which you want to achieve your goal and objective, right? Once you have that, then you can go ahead with your log frames to say, what are my KPIs, right? Key performance indicators. And also for smaller organizations, I think you can possibly identify some of the international standards that you're contributing to, right? Now you have SDGs, you have GIIN, you have IRIS Plus, you have all of these databases, and they have like very standardized indicators, right? So I would say pick indicators that are already very, very prevalent in the industry, so that you can also get a lot of secondary information from the sector, and then possibly look at the data that you would want to collect. But again, depending on how would you want to use it, right? Do you want to use it for evidence generation, or do you want to like report to your donors? Depending on that, you should identify it. So I would say start with a lean M&E system. Again, one of the tip would be that you don't need to have like a dedicated M&E person in the organization. You can integrate M&E in all the in all the JDs that you have, right? In all the designations you have in the organization. So let's say if there's a program manager, or if there is a regional colleague, then their JD should definitely have 5 to 10% of the JD should be dedicated to M&E. That way you can be a little bit more efficient with respect to resources in smaller organizations or organizations that are just starting out.
Richa, my name is Ajit. I am from Pradhan. Actually, I want to ask a question. There are so many tools available in the market for the survey. like Kobo, ODK, Inform, Service CTO, Joho, and many others, Inverter. So actually, I want to know which tool you use in your organization and which is very useful for the evaluation purpose or baseline purpose or any type of survey.
Right. So, thanks for the question, Ajit. We do use a bunch of these tools depending on the context of the program, right? Sometimes the client themselves, because we are a consulting agency, we take assignments. So sometimes clients themselves have copyrighted tools because most of these tools are open source, and therefore some of the clients want and are very conscious about the customer data or the beneficiary data, so they propose certain tools. But as you're right, all of these tools are available. I would say Survey CTO and Kobo Collect are the two tools that are most prominently used right now in terms of data collection.
Thank you, Rita, for the answer. Just one more question. Is there any survey tool also integrated with the AI technology so that we can easily find the analysis or insight of the survey data? Did you
Um,
get my answer? The question, sorry. Did you understand my question?
no. Can you
Okay.
possibly articulate it for me again?
I wanted to know, is there any survey tool in the market which also provide the analysis which has been collected through that application?
Which provides analysis.
Analysis, yes.
Yeah, there are a lot of tools available. Of course, it has to be integrated with the analysis software, right? So even if you use these statistical packages, right, and if you tell them what kind of analysis you need, they will bring it up. For example, these dashboards that are available, Tableau, where you feed in the information and you tell what kind of chart you want to produce, it will produce analysis. It will do the analysis for you. So these visualization tools will be able to do so.
So these applications are also integrated in any survey tool. Just I wanted to know that.
We'll need to check. I'll need to get back to you on that. But usually, there has to be some API available to sort of integrate this kind of an information. We deal with a lot of complex data analysis, so sometimes we don't end up using these tools. But there is usually a plugin available, Ajit.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, sister.
Yeah.
Then how would you let me know this is available or not? Or
Sure. Just drop in your email ID. I can email you more on this.
So, Rich,
okay,
I
thank you
think,
so much.
yeah, we should be able to put some lists together and share it with the participants.
Sure.
I think, Richa, just a couple of them coming in. So one by Megha has come in where she's asking what data collection methodologies would you recommend for need assessment to obtain reliable findings?
What data collection methodologies would you recommend for need assessment to obtain reliable findings, right? So we usually do need assessment. You can do it by 2 to 3 methods, right? One, you are trying to do need assessment by a pure quantitative analysis. So you will design your questionnaire like you would design your baseline studies, but here the idea is to be more open-ended. You can also do need assessments by situational assessments. You can also do it by let's say social mapping exercises or transact works where you sit with the people. You can also do a lot of community meetings if you want to have quicker way of collecting this data, right? So all of these tools can be deployed depending on how much time and how much intensive you want to go with this process. Does that answer your question?
Okay, Megha just responded on chat. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Megha. I can move to the next question from Hamad. Could you comment on the issues related to M&E when the government is the implementing agency? Usually when the government is an implementing agency, they usually have a monitoring agency, either part of the PMU or even an external agency part of the PMU. I think the challenge, of course, is that of articulation. How do you want to present that finding? And there is a lot of triangulation that you need to do before you go to the government if you are in any which way trying to contest any of the number, right? But usually what we found is that in government programs, they do treat us like an equal stakeholder in the whole process. And now with Niti Aayog coming into the picture and so much work done by the DMEO, um, I don't see a very pertinent challenge associated with it. Of course, you have to be a little bit conscious about what you're speaking and how you want to put up, and possibly you want to go with like mitigations, etc. when you're going there. But for largely for us, we treat them like any other stakeholder in the process.
Thanks, Richa. Hamad, hope that answered your question. Else, please feel free to unmute and come in. Okay, I think we could take the next one.
Okay, Richa, may I ask one more question? Ajit from Sridhar.
Yeah, Ajit, give me 2 minutes. I'll just respond to Ayushi's question and then possibly we can take up yours.
Okay.
Yeah. So Ayushi basically is saying that what if the project is already ongoing and we now want to embed M&E midway? Great question. Most of the projects that we do end up doing, we enter very late. A lot of times organizations are in a hurry. They want to spend their money. They want to do it quickly. And therefore M&E sometimes takes a back seat, right? So we've done multiple programs where we came midway, right? Some of the strategies that we have sort of deployed are, one, we then if there is no baseline and we have, let's say, arrived at a midline, we do the midline assessment to say these are the benchmarks and this is what you will track for the remaining part of the project, right? So your midline largely becomes your baseline, with a caveat saying that we don't have the information for last 1 year, right? The other situation could be that your implementing partner has collected information, but you as a monitoring agency has come midway, right? So in that situation, we look at the indicators for which the implementing agency already has data, right? And then we sort of clean it up and say that we can now establish baseline based on the implementing agency data. But at this point in time, we would want to collect the data, right? So there is that kind of a variance. But in most of the situations, implementing agencies have data. It's about how much is usable and how much can you sort of sanitize to use it, right? So there is no ideal way to go about it. We make use of what is available, and sort of analyze that kind of an information. In usually in longer term projects, if there is going to be a phase 2, the end line of the phase 1 project can be then assumed like a baseline for the second project, right? Even if you've not collected information. So there are these tips and tricks through which you can use data. But if there is no data available, then of course there is no possibility and you start from scratch and you lose any information of the previous cycle. Does that answer your question, Ayushi?
Hi, Richa, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right, thank you for that answer. What I wanted to ask, apart from this, is that if implementing agency is actually doing M&E itself for their internal processes, let's say, in that case, if that is being done midway, how can, what can be the start for that?
Oh, so you as an implementing agency has only started collecting information during the middle of the project?
Right, information was being collected, but what if there's no M&E system already in place? Now we want to build on a more robust system.
Right. So in these situations also, what we've done is we have created the theory of change, we have created the logical framework, and we have then gone back to the information to say how much can we retrofit in this log frame, right? And that's how you sort of go ahead with it.
All right. Thank you so much, Richa.
Thanks, Richa. Ajit, I think you had a question. Would you like to go?
Yes, yes, yes. See, actually, Richa, I want to know, in our organization, there is a well-established M&E system, but many small level organization, not small. So those who doesn't have sufficient money to establish a big or well-established M&E system, they reach out to me to guide to how to establish in their organization. So at the basic level, I guide them to use the Google spreadsheet or Excel-based MIS. So just I want to know from you, as you are in this field, is there any complete package available in the market for such organizations so that I can guide them to purchase that package uh, and they can implement that in their organization?
Right. Ajit, I don't think there is a package available because I don't think we've reached that stage of productizing the entire M&E, right? Usually if the organization has the right kind of intention, then they can one way to go about it is to hire an agency who would diagnose the organization with respect to what you already have in terms of expertise and what you need to get, right? So get a diagnostic study done, and also possibly get the designing part done where where the external agency can design components for you, and then those frameworks can then be used for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the lane, right? So I think, yeah, to just like answer your question in black and white, there is no package available. But for example, we at Satwa exactly do this. We are working with a lot of organizations, NGOs, both big and small, who have realized that they need to sort of standardize things in their organization. So we work with them for a 3-month period or a 4-month period. We design the frameworks for them, and then we sort of build their capacity, and then we build their capacity so that they can continue from there on, right? And then we exit in 3 to 4 months of period, and then they can continue with their own stuff.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Peter, for your answer.
Saurabh, I think I answered your question. Let me read again. Yeah, I think I've answered that question, Saurabh.
Yeah, Saurabh, we have taken this up. In case there's anything more to this question, or if you want to elaborate something different, yeah, please feel free to unmute. But I think there's another one that's coming. And I'd also like to say, in case anyone has questions regarding IDI as well, India Data Insights, please feel free to ask that as well. We have Veda on the call, so Veda would be happy to take them up.
Right, Shantanu. So usually so again, Satwa does this kind of a work where we work with the organizations to establish a theory of change for the organization. Right now, you can always start to do this internally, but usually when an internal person creates a TOC, there is a lot of information that's available, and it becomes difficult for the internal person to sort of articulate things, because to them the system is so much more complex, right? When a third party will come in and diagnose this entire process, they will declutter it for you. They will also give you a platform, and they will also facilitate this process for you, right? Usually when you create a org TOC, we can only bring M&E expertise, right? But what we do is we talk to everybody in the organization. That doesn't happen internally if one person is trying to create the TOC by themselves, right? And so when we come in, or by we, I don't mean just Satwa, any organization that you hire, they will come in, they'll talk to all the unique stakeholders in the organization, and then understand what are the linkages, etc., and then possibly will be able to articulate. So I would say, as a process, do as many stakeholder consultations as possible. Have a whiteboard, put in your put in your sticky notes, and then try and see how can you sort of bucket things together. The other thing you can do is, there are standard frameworks available, right, for like various themes. So for example, if the organization is only working on, let's say, childhood cancer, or only working on, let's say, livelihood, then you have certain frameworks available. Maybe you want to overlap that with the theory of change template, and that's how you can sort of at least start going with it. But feel free to reach out to us as well. We have created org level TOCs, and we can hopefully support you on that as well.
Thanks, Richa. I think we have a couple of minutes to go. So any last questions? Maybe a couple of them we could pick up. I think, yeah, we've exhausted the questions for today. But thanks all once again. Thank you, Richa, and thank you, Veda, as well, for facilitating the session today. And to all the participants as well, thank you for joining in. I hope you all found the session valuable. And we'd also like you all, I mean, we'll be sharing the one session recording as well as the presentation that we had put up with all of you. And also happy to have you all fill out the feedback form that we'd be sending through the email. I think that would be really useful for both our speakers. They'd be happy to hear your feedback. And in case there are any other questions, and like I said, we had our previous session on designing effective programs, wherein we had covered theory of change and LFA and how to build that in detail. So in case you missed that session, we could share the links and recordings to that as well. But again, thank you so much, all of you. And yeah, we'll keep you posted about the next session as a part of our series shortly. So thank you again.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.